Hey gang, what is poppin'? This video is all about the incredible, versatile belt sander. I use this underrated and underutilized machine all the time for many tasks of all types. In this video, I will show you the proper way to use a belt sander, and you will be amazed as to how much time it cuts down on sanding. Here I'm fitting a drawer bottom, and notice how I've clipped the corners at a 45-degree angle at the chop saw to remove most of that bulk. Then using my belt sander torque and probably a 80 or 100 grit, I can quickly round those corners to fit the routed profile on the interior part of this drawer box. I'm not a big fan of grooves in a drawer box for a couple of reasons. You might check out those videos. I can leave a link in the description. But routing a rebate to accommodate a drawer bottom this way means that the drawer bottom edge is not showing. And of course, it's still going to be very strong once you add some glue and some clamps to hold it in place until the glue dries. And another strong key point, this method automatically squares up your drawer box.
This is really effective because of the platen that I'm always talking about is nice and flat, right? So I've highlighted this platen from here to here. That's our footprint and 4 inches wide, right? So we can utilize that to not only sand where we want to, we can always also utilize those marks to keep from sanding where we don't want to. So we're going to sand these first, and these overlapping rails will get some cross-grain scratches, but that's okay. Let me show you how this process works. All right, in just a few seconds, we were able to get the glue off, and this is just about flush. I can feel a little bit of offset here. Of course, I can still see my pencil marks there, so I know I haven't sanded much. This one is still showing glue and of course some offset. So we'll hit that one more time. The position of the door in relation to the camera is a little bit awkward, so I'm gonna turn the door around to do this left side, but normally I would just leave it in place.
And here we go. You'll notice I make kind of small circles, or it doesn't really matter. You just want to keep that belt sander moving side to side. That's hugely important to not stop, right? You stop, you're going to dig in. Truthfully, as I mentioned, it's a bit awkward. You can see my left elbow is up in the air so you can get a view. I should have put the camera on the right side, but no big shake. I need the practice. But anyway, bam, just like that, nice and flush.
So typically with a door, your rails and stiles are a little bit wider than this. This is a style I've been doing where the rails are a lot narrower than the vertical stiles. And one of the rails, the top rail will end up getting a handle. So these at this stage are pretty narrow. So it's a little bit narrow of a place for the footprint of the belt sander to ride, because typically what I would do is I would start in here somewhere, and then I would come across and I would just let this edge sand right in here without introducing too many cross-grain scratches in this already sanded piece. But it's a little bit hard to do with this narrow rail. So what I'll do is I will start here with very little pressure, almost having the belt sander hover, but it's not. It's sitting down on the surface. You're just reducing the weight. And I will start the trigger there and then move to sand all of this. All of these components, the stiles and the rails, were pulled right off of the jointer and planer. They've never been sanded, so they just have light mill marks. So all that comes out fairly quickly, and I'm using a 180 grit belt. Here we go.
Okay, right out of the gate, you'll notice a couple of things. 3 things, actually. A, of course, moving the belt sander back and forth, sideways. 2, I'm goosing the throttle. And 3, now I can, once I'm past that corner, I can keep the belt sander in the center of that rail.
as I started sanding this, I realized that this belt is it's polishing the surface. It's not doing a very good job. And the reason why is I've been sanding these drawer fronts. As I'm removing the glue, I was using an already used belt. And you can see right here at the seam where that glue will accumulate. So it's not very effective anymore. This will probably get tossed. Let me get a little bit fresher belt.
All right, same key points, starting to corner, goose the throttle. You'll see as I come to this other corner, I'm just moving that belt sander side to side until those two components are flush. We've introduced a few little scratches, cross-grain scratches, no big shake.
I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but I can now see very light cross-grain scratches right in there. But remember, this is 180 grit, so they're pretty fine. This all looks pretty good. All the mill marks are gone. Looks really nice and flat, crisp corners. Here again, we've got some cross-grain scratches in this area. I can see some scratches going this direction from the prior sanding stage. So that looks actually pretty good. Again, if this was a wider rail, then I could keep the sander right on this rail and bring it right under this stile and just utilize this edge. And with a light touch, I won't dig a trench here. I will just sand the mill marks out, and then I can blend this style sanding marks with this rail sanding marks with a orbital sander. Remember, when we initially sanded these stiles, we were going across these rails, so the mill marks from the planer are already gone. So it doesn't take much to sand in this area of the corner where these two adjacent components meet. So at this stage, I would cut these doors and drawer fronts to size. They're not flush at the end. They need to be sized correctly. This bottom rail, actually, I don't know if that's the bottom anymore. I forgot to mark it because I was too worried about making a video. But I can look at the other ones and match up the grain, and I'll know the orientation. But let's pretend, for the sake of this video, that this is the bottom rail and that this is the top. So I will be adding some handles. Let me grab one. This handle is 3/16, so I will subtract 3/16 off this distance. And when I'm sizing the door, I will start with these cuts first. And the reason I would do that is because if there's any chip out, when I make these cuts, it will take that chip out off. So sequence of cuts is always important. I don't want to start with these because then I would make this cut and it would have a tendency to have small chip out. And I'm talking small chips, but it all adds up, and it's an accumulation of all those little details that make a big difference in the end. All right, got the handles glued on, and you'll notice zero glue squeeze out in there because when this handle gets glued on, I put the handle on and I chase it this direction. I place this edge first and bring it this way so it pushes all the glue this way. And of course, all that glue and this little bit of overhang on the handle got cut off at the table saw with a nail fence. So that's flush. This rail here has been sanded, as well as these corners. So that's finished sanded. Of course, the panel's finished sanded. So now we'll start with the back side. We'll get this all finished sanded. Then we can finish sand the handle, finish sand the rest of this frame, finish sand the edges, and we're done.
I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really not. So essentially what I'm doing is once the component is all glued up, I rough sand with 180 belt sander. That gets rid of glue, gets everything flush, and gets rid of mill marks. Then I cut the doors to size because you might be banging them or scratching them on the sliding table saw. Once they're cut to size, then I bring everything back and finish sand with a DA with 180 grit, and that's about as high as I go. So really it's two sanding steps to get these doors nice and smooth. So yeah, nobody likes sanding, me included. And so with 2 steps of sanding, I can get everything accomplished. Since I'm using a top coat type finish, usually conversion varnish or lacquer, I don't need to get this crazy smooth. I don't want it to be smooth because I need a little bit of tooth for that lacquer or conversion varnish to bond. However, if you're using an oil type finish, something that's termed a penetrating film or a penetrating oil, I should say, not a film finish, then yes, you can sand higher. You can sand, you know, 320, 400, 600, as high as you want, because those types of finishes soak into the wood. And so the wood needs to be, it should be smooth. But with a top coat type finish, the finish itself is what becomes smooth. Hope that makes sense.
So I'm adding some little dividers to a drawer just here in the shop. They're a little bit wider, thicker than I wanted, but it won't matter. So I had some old drawer stock. When I make drawer, I just make long lengths, edge band it. And for some reason, these weren't sanded. So there's saw marks on here. So I just ganged 4 of them together here. I can quickly sand all that. I've added some pencil mark, right?
In other words, the edge banding is typically pre-sanded. But here, this is just quick, easy. All the parts come out the same height and everything's sanded smoothly.
Perfect.
And here is what those little pieces were for, just some dividers in a shop drawer. I love this thing. I use it all the time. Although I have a bigger edge sander, I have more available grit sizes with this dude. And I do have plans for this on my website. I'll leave a link in the description. It may not fit your particular belt. Or belt sander. This is the 9401 Makita, but it will give you the idea on how to make one. You'll love it. So this is kind of an L-shape 2-part assembly with a drawer front and a handle. I just wanted to show you a couple of things. Notice this bench dog where I'm putting this handle, right? It aligns with the back. That way when the belt sander is blocking the view, I know that the back end of my pad, I know where it's at. In other words, in the front, it's a little bit easier to see. But in the back, I don't really know where it's at, and I don't want to tip and round over that back edge. So by utilizing that dog, I know I can keep track of where I'm at. Belt sander tricks, man. Gotta love them. All right, hear that? No, not the air compressor. Those protruding screws. We can get those flush easily with a belt sander. And before you want to give me crap about starting a fire with sparks and sawdust, look, we've been doing it like this for over 40 years. Never have there been an issue. I'm not saying there couldn't be. I'm just saying I haven't, and I'm going to keep doing it this way. If you wanted to make you feel better, you could probably disconnect your vacuum. So that's an option. Now this ugly thing is actually a shop cabinet, so I want to put a heavy chamfer on the bottom. That way if your boot goes underneath there or a hose gets caught, it's not going to chip that bottom edge. And yes, you could use a router. This is how we do it. It's fast, easy. You'll never know that it's not a perfect 45-degree angle, and it's very effective. All right, same cabinet up on top. Of course, I didn't want pocket holes up there, so I just glued this into a dado, or into a rabbet, I should say. I've got a bunch of glue in the way. I'm using an old belt with probably a 100 grit, maybe a 120. We can knock that down flush, and then keep going to get that edging flush with that top surface. belt sander is king for stuff like this. Now, of course, sanding across the grain with the front of the belt sander sticking over the cabinet is the quickest way to sand things flush, but it's also going to introduce the most scratches. So I can turn it at a slight angle, and then as I get closer to being done, I can sand with the grain, or at least pretty much in line. And boom, everything's nice and flush and looking pretty.
I'm working on this blade box, and I've got a few saw marks on some of this edging. It's very slight, but there's some areas that aren't quite flush. A little bit of glue. A lot of ways to clean that up. I'm going to use a belt sander. I'm gonna start with this grain here, so I can come, across the vertical grain on the sides. So to start, I just put the sander in place and pull the trigger.
So by starting at the corner, that's kind of your base point, right? You can register flat. And even though this material's about 19 millimeters wide, 3/4 wide, not very wide, you can still balance that big old beast on that narrow edge. As I roll into that other corner, same thing. I'm keeping the sander moving and establishing flat right on the corner.
I'll do that all the way around, and then I can hit it with something like this.
So yeah, sanding doesn't have to be crazy long procedure, right? I start with 180 with a belt sander, and I finish with 180 with a DA or orbital. Super easy.
That's how you do it.
And here's the finished product, a movable blade storage cabinet. You may have noticed I just numbered my drawers. I didn't, write the blade size and configuration of the teeth or any of that jazz. I know this will change over the years, so I just made a cheat sheet. All right, to keep the audience from falling asleep, here I'm going to speed up the video, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm establishing flat at the corners. I roll around. And here, I just need to sand everything flush. I don't need it pretty. This is going to get a countertop on top, but I need all these components to be flush with each other. I love this thing. This is my Panther router cart. You may have seen the video on it. I don't know why it took me so long to make it. I guess I wanted to make sure that all the features were included as I used the Panther router, and I would come up with ideas. So lots of storage in the front, and then on this right end, I have this drawer that comes out, more storage, but additionally, I can add this platform. I made it foldable so I could, fit it inside one of the drawers. It indexes into some cleats, and boom, I have a nice area where I can collect more junk, right? It's another horizontal surface, but I can also add this dude. This is a fence off my bandsaw. I can add that black extension, and now I have a level support for long pieces. This works excellent.
So I think you can see, maybe, if it'll show up, they're just slightly proud. You can see little shadows that the low raking light is making. And so I just need to get that flush, clean up the glue and everything without going too deep. The engraving is pretty deep, but this veneer is 1/42 of an inch. So we need to be really careful, and the best tool for the job is a belt sander.
You can see that I'm being super careful, right? I believe I have a 180 grit belt on there, and I'm goosing the throttle, checking it, run it again. I don't want to go too much. Just takes patience. At this point, I don't want to remove all of the pencil marks, just close. A belt sander is going to sand everything flat. If I was doing this with a DA or an orbital, the edges would get round, plus it's easy to burn through. All right, here the video is slightly sped up where you can still see technique. Of course, everybody knows about adding some pencil marks, and we can keep track. If you can still see your pencil marks, you know that you're not going to burn through that veneer. And of course, that low raking light is a massive help. All right, I think you can see with the low raking light that everything's just about perfectly flushed up. And you can still see some pencil marks. That's where it said wipers. There's a pencil mark going across there. Of course, there's some glue here and there, and that'll all get cleaned up with the DA. And this one I already did. And the letters look kind of cloudy at this point. That's because, well, they're just full of sawdust, but I think it'll all blow out with air. So yeah, that's what I call success. And if you didn't see the YouTube video, this is a replica or a kit car of a Jaguar 1943 Duke, something like that. Here's some finished shots of the dash. It's my father-in-law, Steve Brooks. And the sun was starting to set, so it kind of cast an amber tone, but yeah, it is curly maple. The dash fit perfectly and turned out beautifully. Nothing too tricky here, but this is my favorite way to flush up a solid wood banding onto a substrate. We'll just mark some pencil lines. I'm only going to sand that area. I don't want to distort that panel at all. We've got a little bit of glue sticking out, and of course the edge banding is slightly proud. You'll notice how I let that belt sander right at the tipping point stick over that front edge. That ensures that that back wheel doesn't dig in. Super important and very effective. And occasionally I'll get the question or comment about why not use a lipping planer. Well, you could use a lipping planer, but you would still have to sand to get things perfectly flush. In addition, you want a little bit of scuff for the glue to bond the veneer. That makes sense, yeah? Here we have some solid walnut. These were a pair of domino docks that I gave away on Instagram. And yes, of course, that top edge could be hit with a hand plane. That would be very effective. This video is all about the belt sander, so I'm showing you a way to get that smooth, get rid of any mill marks. With a component just about flush with the top of the bench, we can use the bench with pencil marks as training wheels. Balancing on about 3/4 of an inch or 19 millimeters can be a little tricky, but with those pencil marks, I know I'm not going to lean over too far. These 4 pieces of wood serve as part of the luggage rack for Steve's Jaguar. Solid wood, walnut, and maple. The maple in the center is about 1/4 inch thick, 6.5 millimeters, and underneath are strategically placed T-nuts that will grab the bolts coming in from underneath, so all the fasteners are nice and hidden. The original design or the original pieces had carriage bolts going through the face, and we're like, nah, we can do better than that. And of course, the original ones were just oak and not inlaid, but this is for my eccentric father-in-law. I don't have a finished shot of these, but I can assure you that they came out beautiful and everything was flushed up with a simple belt sander. Here's an older video of some shelves that I added to a customer's bed. The goal was to quickly sand all of these radiuses and make everything consistent and keep the edges square. Belt sander with everything ganged together and clamped is the easiest way to do it. Notice when I come around the corner or off the corner and I'm on the flat area, I'm establishing flat with the belt sander. Flat on the flat area, that means everything is nice and true, and then I can roll back around to sound that curve nice and smooth. And bam, just like that, I have 6 of them done, and all the edges are true 90 degrees. Getting narrow components smooth will not happen with a DA. Don't kid yourself. Put a straight edge on that narrow board after you've hit it with a DA, and you will notice that the edges are rounded. But with a belt sander, all we have to do is find that balance point, and we can make that stock beautiful, flat, and smooth. And look closely here, you can faintly see the pencil marks. They're sanded pretty much even all the way across. That way I know I'm not tipping one way or the other. And yes, of course, another way to do this, and how I do it often, is with a hand plane. But this video is not about hand planes, it's about belt sanders. All right, those narrow components made up this little tray, and I am so excited to share with you this entire project. So be sure to come back to see that and make sure that you're subscribed if you're not already. Thanks a ton for watching.